Life in our blessed land is a constant barrage these days of lawlessness, scarcity, tumult, and chaos. The left wing, led by the lawless Biden administration and the anti-American Socialist Democrat Party, have laid down a marker. We either accept government control, deviancy, and third world status, or we get canceled. Earlier this month, the University of Virginia's Center for Politics released this poll. 52% of Trump voters and 41% of Biden voters want red states and blue states to split from one another in recognition that the left wing no longer wishes to live under the greatest document ever conceived of by man, the United States Constitution. Has the Marxist left succeeded in destroying what unites our states in America? Is America ready for a divorce? That's the question we ask in a special preamble tonight. Let's bring in someone who has been preparing for such an eventuality, president of the Texas Nationalist Movement and author of TEXIT, Why and How Texas Will Leave the Union, Daniel Miller. Mr. Miller, welcome. You know, Texas is the only state to have ever existed on its own as a country. How would your vision of a TEXIT work?
Well, first off, thanks for having me on, Chris, to talk about this very important topic, because unfortunately, this conversation about national divorce has been, the space on this has been primarily occupied by, a lot of pundits and people that are thinking about this like a fantasy football situation. And truly, what people need to understand about this is this process has been ongoing. There are people out here that are on the ground working this issue, like our organization, the Texas Nationalist Movement. And, to your question about whether, how TEXIT would work, if people will think back to Brexit and understand that the Brexit referendum happened. Prior to that, in 2014, the Scottish independence referendum happened. In fact, at the end of World War II, there were roughly 54 recognized fully sovereign countries around the world. And by the end of the 20th century, there were 192. Those countries did not fall from space. The earth did not get any bigger. They were people like us that said that we believe the best people to govern us just happened to be us.
Now, TEXIT was brought up as a bill in the Texas legislature, but the majority there wouldn't allow it to come up for a vote for the people of Texas. Do you have any idea, any data that suggests Texans are even ready to split from the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. This issue has actually been polled quite extensively, probably not as much as we would like. And when we founded the TNM back in 2005, we found some earlier polling data that said that support for independence was in single digits. Now, good news is we've always polled higher than the approval rating of the U.S. Congress, which polls somewhere above or below that of leprosy, right? But we fast forward to 2009, where the issue was asked by a Research 2000 poll, found about half of Republicans, about 45% of independent voters, and 15% of Democrats were in favor. Then you fast forward to 2014, around the time of the Scottish independence referendum. It was polled again, but a very concrete question of political will. That show that 54% of Republicans, half of independent voters, and 35% of Democrats. And then since then, there have been other polls, like the poll you cited at the very beginning of this segment. What we're seeing here is not just in Texas. We're seeing it happen around the United States. And it's understandable why. You have the federal government that has become overbearing, that absolutely ignores the sovereignty of the states and the founding document for which the Union was created or created by. And so when they do that and states want to utilize the federal government to impose their will on states like Texas that believe that the states are sovereign, that believe that rights come from God and not government, and we want the federal government out of our lives, it's very difficult to understand how we can all be governed under one umbrella. And what we see here today is just the tail end of that. Texans are sick and tired of being governed by 180,000 pages of federal laws, rules, and regulations.
Right. We've lost this idea that it was the states that created the federal government. That's just a fact. And that seems to be a little bit of a I think a primer. I think that most Americans ought to get back to that fundamental fact. I've only got about a minute and a half, but I want you to answer this. Do you think other states would follow? Let's just say Texas does get a vote in the future and votes for a TEXIT. Do you think other states would follow Texas out of the union And how would Texas defend itself if it did break away? How would you divide military assets? Would Texas have nuclear weapons?
Chris, that's not one question. That's two questions, and it's limit one per customer. No, I'm just kidding. But, look, other states are. Literally before this segment, I was on a video conference with the leaders of the TEXIT movement, the ones that want California to leave, and the people in New Hampshire. And New Hampshire has literally just filed legislation calling for even small New Hampshire to withdraw from the union. So we're already seeing this sentiment everywhere else. And sure, on the other end of independence, many other states could form alliances just like we see around the world for mutual defense, for trade, for travel, for, the way that nation states around the world handle business. We could do that on the other side of this. And frankly, when I released the TEXIT book, I went around on a media tour encouraging every state to begin to have the conversation and ask themselves the question that we've been asking since day one. And it's simply this: knowing everything we know about the federal system and the federal government right now, would you vote today to join the union? And if you wouldn't vote to join, why in the world would you ever vote to stay?
Yeah, well, that's a very fine question. Seeing Joe Biden in the Oval Office makes a lot of people want to run the other way. Daniel Miller, thank you very much, man. We appreciate the time here on the Chris Salcedo Show.